Now it is my great pleasure to bring up Rick Huey, who is the biologist with the Washington State Ferries, which is involved with marine mammals because they monitor them. They have a whole team of people. Well, he'll tell you a whole lot more, but he has a unique perspective on seeing marine mammals from various places that the ferries dock. So come on up, Rick.
Hello, and thanks for Susan and Howie for having me here. And I'm here to answer the question, why does ferries even have a biologist? What's that about? So we'll see if we can figure that out if I can get this show started. Yeah. Okay, looks good? Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk about our projects we have currently, focusing on our two big ones. Talk a little bit about why we have biologists. We have more than one. Plenty of people helping me out. And then talk a little bit about what we do during projects, what we've seen this last season. And if there's time, I'll fit in a little bit about our ferry vessel noise that we're just starting to figure out what kind of effects it may have on marine mammals. So why do we have biologists? Well, one of the main reasons is if you're building on the shoreline or in the water, you don't do anything without the right permit. And you don't get the right permit without analyzing the effects you'll have on marine mammals, fish, or seabirds. And so when we get out there and we start our actual work, we're doing all kinds of monitoring. So this is a map here on one side showing a monitoring zone for the Mukilteo project, and we'll see more maps coming up. And here's a crew here getting ready to go out. This is a project a few years ago at Port Townsend. So they're going to go out and monitor a small endangered seabird called the marble murrelet during impact pile driving of steel piles that can create an injury zone. And so we watch that zone to make sure we don't hurt anything. And these people look happy right now, but I'm just about to send them out in the pouring rain, where I stay in the terminal and watch and make sure everything goes well. So briefly what we do, we have to do consultations under the Endangered Species Act. 2 of the services manage the act. Up to 13 ESA listed species may be present near our terminals when we do a project. And so without a permit, you cannot, quote unquote, take an animal, and take can mean a number of things, but for us, the possibilities are harass, within water noise, harm, which we try to avoid, of course, and kill, which we work really hard to avoid and never have killed or harmed an animal on a project yet that we know of. So fish species, Chinook, bull trout, listed rockfish. These are all the different kinds of fish that we consult on. Southern resident killer whale, of course, humpback whale, and the marble murrelet. This bird is real interesting. You might have heard about it more from the nesting in the old growth and the timber wars in past decades. But these birds will come into Puget Sound. They'll fly up to 50 miles to forage on the shoreline. So they're foraging for forage fish, sand lance, or herring. And they're having a lot of trouble, not just because of difficulty with nesting, but they're having trouble because there are less forage fish for them to find now. So they're having to work harder. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is very concerned about these birds, and they're very strict when we do steel impact pile driving about how we monitor to make sure none of these birds are hurt. And so we also go through permitting under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And so MMPA came about for many reasons, but one of the reasons was because of the captures of SRs here in that 1 decade in the past. And the MMPA prohibits importing marine mammals and marine products, and it also directs stock assessments, regular counts of how many animals in a certain stock are present in an area or on the coast. And then the stranding networks many of us are familiar with. And what we do with the MMPA is we get ourselves a marine construction permit. And it does allow us to do limited harassment of submarine mammals. That means when we create in-water noise, not the kind of noise that would harm or kill, but essentially like a masking sound that makes it a little more difficult to hear, we're allowed to do some limited harassment, but we work hard to make sure we even limit that amount. So here are the different marine mammal hearing ranges. This is from the National Marine Fisheries Service threshold guidance. And so animals hear in different frequencies. So what we'll do is we'll take clips of our pile driving sound, and our acoustic specialist will analyze for the different frequencies within these clips and try to predict the different areas where we'll either cause harm or maybe harass. And so we map these areas out so we can plan ahead to monitor during our projects. And so under MNPA, we look at all the marine mammals that may be present, not just the ESA listed humpbacks, our southern residents. And includes sea lions, harbor seals. We occasionally see northern elephant seals near our projects, minke, Pacific white-sided, a little more rare for us, maybe in the northern terminals, we might see it, and gray whale. And we certainly see transients, harbor porpoise and dulls, though dulls less common than we used to. And so now I'm going to talk about some of our bigger projects and then give some examples of how we are doing the monitoring and some of what we've seen. So first, this is our main terminal at Seattle. It's the busiest commuter route. We have 19 ferry terminals and 1 maintenance facility, which is essentially a state shipyard for our ferries at Eagle Harbor. And so this is the Bainbridge and Bremerton run that comes in here. And the vessels are generally the jumbo 2s, the biggest vessels we have. And so what we're doing is we're going to be doing a 5-year reconstruction of Colman Dock. And the reason we're doing it is because it's not up to seismic standards. The northern terminal, or the northern trestle you see up here, that's all original timber. And so it's very difficult to keep original timber standing up. It's also creosote treated timber, which was common practice in the past. And so that'll all be coming out as part of this project. And then there'll be a lot of upgrades to the facility. We'll be building, we've already started construction where we're extending a bit further to the south, pulling that north trestle, and then we'll be rebuilding and we'll have a brand new terminal building. And so you see the orientation of the terminal building now, and that's going to be different when we finish. So it's going to look more like this. Terminal building oriented to the water. There will be an entry-level building toward the front. You can see in this picture the viaduct is gone. This will be roughly, I think, 2021 when this facility opens. And there'll be a lot better connection to multimodal, bus, and other features. And a different view toward the entry building. Again, close-up of the entry. And from the water side. So the building itself, it's also, we're doing steps to make it as sustainable as possible. So we're looking at LEED standards and seeing what we can engineer into the building to reduce energy use. And some of the environmental highlights, so we'll be removing over 7,000 tons of creosote by the time the project is done here. And we'll be removing some fill underneath the north trestle, opening up some new shoreline. And we'll be having improved stormwater treatment at the facility. We're voluntarily capping 5 acres of contaminated sediment. So in 1989, we already have a sediment cap, which is an engineered cap that seals off pollutants that are in the sediments. And we're expanding that cap by 5 acres around the perimeter of those 4 acres. Again, we're doing LEED green building, sustainable work on the building itself. And like I said, we're monitoring to prevent injury of marine mammals and marbled murrelet. And these are very large projects for us. Usually we have projects that last, say, a month to 6 weeks. And when we got ready for this project, I began to have nightmares about the collection of paper from all the sightings that would start piling up. And who would get to go through all that paper at the end of the season? Probably me. And so luckily we found someone who helped us get on ArcGIS Survey 123. So now all of our field surveys are entered on phones or tablets, and they're sent to the cloud, and we can pull those all off and work with that data on a real-time basis and capture all that information and save me from the nightmare of a pile of paper. And so here's an example of some of the maps we produce that try to predict the sound areas. So the red area you see, that's an area where we're shutting down if a marbled murrelet would come that close to the project during active steel impact pile driving. And so murrelets are pretty rare in that area. We did, on the very first day of the project, see 2 nearby. But luckily, since then, we've not seen any. We see more on the Bainbridge side, which tends to make sense. There's probably better fishing on that side than the Seattle urban waterfront. And some of these other lines here, it's probably a little bit difficult to read the keys at the bottom, but it's also keying out different shutdown or harassment areas for different marine mammals depending on their hearing frequency range. And so for every type of pile, it produces a different map and a different series of distances because there's different frequencies produced by timber pile or steel pile, or vibratory pile driving, or impact pile driving. And so here's a map showing the vibratory pile driving area for 36-inch steel piles. So this was done with a model that's pretty conservative. So you can see that's pushing all the way over to the shoreline of Bainbridge Island. And luckily the island was in the way because the model said it kept going. So again, it's very conservative. So one thing we were able to do when the project got going is we sent our acoustic specialist out in a boat with a hydrophone, and we found the actual edge where you could not detect that vibratory sound anymore. And we were able to eliminate about 1/3 of that distance. So we pulled back that monitoring zone. And that's good for everyone because that allows the southern residents a path to go back and forth as they come in to go fishing. And so for this, during the start of the project, I think we were seeing more shutdowns because the southern residents were coming into our harassment zone. And we did not ask permission to harass southern residents. We just committed to shutting down anytime they came close by. And so we were doing that. And now we've created an avenue for them by, checking the model and pulling it back to where the sound actually is. Construction stoppages. We've lost 15 hours due to seals or sea lions or southern residents being in the zone where we had to go ahead and shut down the work. You can see, it's a little hard to see there, but there is a California sea lion, a young one, who's decided to crawl right in the middle of all the work. And luckily we were done for the day with pile driving, so we were fine. We've also lost 6 hours to weather. Sometimes the weather is so bad that the crane is not stable, you don't want to do work. Other times the weather's so bad we can't see to do our monitoring, so no work happens if we can't see to do the monitoring. So what have we seen this year? We were hoping to produce a map that would be a little easier to visualize this, but ran out of time. But in one column here, here's what we've seen. There's 5 marbled murrelet, lots of harbor seals, lots of sea lions. We've seen the residents come through 148 sightings. That of course means we've seen them come through many times and seen them multiple times. We've seen the transients come through. This did not capture them coming through last week, so this number is going to be higher after this. And then a number of unidentified animals, a little bit hard to ID sometimes. And then more unusual, the common and the bottlenose dolphin. I've been reading on Orca Network sightings that they've been seen, and on the first day of the project, they showed up with murrelets, which is perfect, So we are seeing more unusual animals in the sound these days. So now a quick look at Mukilteo. A lot of you that ride the ferry, you've probably seen the work going on. You may have seen the old tank farm pier come down. So we'll take a look at that. So here by 2019, we hope it's a look at the new terminal layout. So this would be to the east toward the Everett side of the current terminal. There'll be a lot more holding, a lot more cars will be able to come off the hill down into this holding area. There'll be a brand new terminal here, and we're told that the currents are not as strong, so it's going to be easier for the captains to manage the ships. Should be easier also on fuel usage. And a look inside the new terminal building as designed. It's a longhouse-inspired design. So we've been working with tribes on these designs. Again, more tribal designs. I think this is Lashute language over the Tikaput area. This is a Elliott Point Treaty area. Of course, it's a very significant historical and cultural site. So the way we're building this terminal is really very carefully to make sure that we don't damage any cultural resources that may be on the site. Another view of the building with the ship in the back. And now a look at some of the work we did to get to the point we are now. So here's the old tank farm pier that was in place. So the new terminal will be just almost where the pier comes into the land down at the bottom. And here I am hard at work surveying the terminal. So we did survey the terminal because not only do we deal with endangered species and marine mammals, but Migratory Bird Treaty Act has us check to see what kind of birds may be using piers before we demolish them to make sure that we try to miss nesting season and we try to minimize any harm we might do to a bird on this old tank farm pier. And luckily the geese were done nesting and moved off before we started. So the pier removal took about 8 months. So here's before and after, and now we're going to try for a video and see if we can get it to work. So let's see if we can watch the pier come down or not. And it's going to go pretty quick. So it's going to start in the middle, work out, they'll come back and they'll pick up some debris, and then quickly come back into shore and finish it off. So let's see if this works. Okay, here we go. So there they are, working their way out. Coming back in. Going to get more debris. And taking down the inshore part. And that's that. If only it took that time. It'd be much cheaper. So, and then the last step, once we know that the new terminal is going to work like it should, we'll take down the old terminal. So the highlights, that pier was over 4,000 tons of creosote that came out. Stormwater treatment, state-of-the-art, some infiltration in appropriate areas, other areas are going to be treated. Again, we're looking at the building for green building standards, monitoring, using Survey 123 again to prevent me from going crazy with paper. And here's some maps. So here's the large steel vibratory area, and you can see how far that goes up. So again, this is that very conservative model. We lay out our zones for marine mammals here, and we actually had monitors deployed where you see the binocular icons. So monitors up at Tulalip, Langley, riding the ferry, and at the terminal itself. And we went out, we had our acoustic specialist get in the boat, take his meter out, and we were able to cut it down to just a little short of Hat Island, Hattagany Island, as we like to call it. And so we reduced that long arm off of it. And so that, again, was, it's good because there can be some rough water out there, and it makes it hard to see things. So if we have a bad weather day, we can't see well, no work can happen. So we contained the area, it was more manageable to monitor. Also had more area where the southern residents, if they came through, could more safely pass. And so here's what we've seen in Mukilteo so far. A lot more marbled murrelet, not surprisingly. We've seen 126 sightings, likely many of the same birds coming back day after day foraging. They've all been further out though, so even when we've been doing impact pile driving, they've been way out of our zone, but they are present. Some stellar sea lion, a lot more harbor seals, then down in Seattle, California sea lions. We haven't seen any of the southern residents on this project this year. We have seen transients though, and none of the more unusual animals, no common or bottlenose dolphins at the Mukilteo project. I forgot to mention the Seattle project, it'll go 4 more years, so there's plenty more chance to see interesting things. Yes?
What does the take mean?
Yeah, good point. So the take, remember our MMPA permit that allowed us to do some limited harassment when an animal comes into a noise zone. So that means how many times we've seen an animal in that noise zone. So we can say that we're not exceeding our permit, we have so many takes, and we're not overdoing what's allowed. So construction stoppages at Mukilteo, 12 hours so far, mostly seals, 21 hours to weather. This area catches more bad weather than Elliott Bay. And removal, so this is more of a general summary of removal. So since 2008, we've taken out over 16,000 tons of creosote from Puget Sound. All the old terminals were timber. There's still a lot of timber left out there, but little by little it's all going away as we do new projects. So Mukilteo was 4,000 tons. Colman, once it comes out in 2019, we think, we'll have a total of almost 24,000 tons of material removed from Puget Sound. And I tried to figure out how much that is. And so if my math is right, it's 16,000 Priuses stacked one on top of each other, or 4 Wenatchee Jumbo 2s, a big commuter vessel, the weight of the vessel, fully loaded, 2,500 passengers and 220 cars. So 4 of those. So that's what I think 25,000 tons, 24,000 tons is.
Where does it go?
It goes to a qualified landfill. It does not get reused in garden projects like it used to decades ago. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about ferry vessels and whales. Now this is more of a developing issue for us. So we know that our vessels make noise, and like we saw earlier, we know that marine mammals are hearing in these different frequency ranges. So the question is, what does ferry vessel noise mean for marine mammals? So first, we obey the rules of the road. You know, when we're near marine mammals, especially larger whales, we'll do all the slow down. We come to a stop when we need to. We slow down. We avoid. We also report sightings. A lot of the sightings we give directly to Orca Network. I took a look at some of the sightings logs, and between 2011 and 2017, there were 545 reports, over 2,700 sightings. Most of those large whales, mostly orcas, southern residents, and transients. Also grays, humpbacks, minkies, and dolphins. We unfortunately had to report a couple of deceased animals. We had a gray at Colman in 2015, and a humpback at Fauntleroy in 2016, and a misreported, it was first reported as a dead whale, turned out to be a dead cow at Kingston, and so the log was titled Buoyant Bovine. I didn't make that up, that was in the official log. So the people that call in from the vessels, they're not scientists, they're chief mates, they're deckhands, sometimes captains, and so their language can be a little interesting. So some of the reported behaviors, whales are lounging, they are loitering, lingering, they are making best speed, they are skylarking. And my favorite entry, Chief Mate X, who's been X'd out to protect his, him from being humiliated, reports a plethora of killer whales located mainly on the Kingston side. There are too many to count. He reports they are frolicking and acting like silly mammals. Sounds like the southern residents to me. Yeah. These are your state dollars at work. Okay, so ferry vessel noise. We do have some limited data on our noise. So the University of Washington, along with the National Marine Fisheries Service, was studying in-water noise in Admiralty Inlet for the proposed tidal project that never came to fruition. And they caught the ferry boat, of course, because we go by quite a bit during the day. And so here's a measurement of our vessel 173 dB RMS, which means root mean square. This is a measurement of continuous noise, kind of like vibratory pile driving as opposed to an impact strike. So that you'll see RMS with continuous noise. Measured at a meter, the hydrophone itself was further away, but they normalized to 1 meter, the measurements. And so this potentially, if you look at the thresholds, for just regular harassment, could create like a 3-kilometer zone around the ferry where there might be a problem for a marine mammal. We don't know yet if that means a small injury zone right around the boat or the prop of the boat, or just a harassment zone where it's noisier than would be ideal, but very likely there's something going on. So the question for us is how to figure it out. So one thing we did is we took a look at where whales and our vessels might intersect in the tightest waters. And of course that's the San Juans. We have very tight passages. And we have AIS data, which is the automatic tracking system data on all the vessels, of course. And we'll see if we can make this run. Yeah, here we go. So the larger triangles, you can see they're the runs between the islands, and we're going to see a run off to Sydney up in BC too. So we took this data, and then we worked with our GIS folks to just do a what if. And so we had them essentially draw a halo around our vessels on that run for this day. This was a July 4th day in 2015, just to see what the potential harassment zone could look like. And this is the last run of the night. Everyone's going to go to sleep. It's going to come back up here in a minute. And again, this model is very conservative. This is going to over-predict what the noise zone from a vessel might look like. But you can see in these narrow passages, even if we're over-predicting and we find it's much smaller, it's likely we're creating a lot of noise between the islands. And here we go, there goes the run to Sydney. And so the question is, we have some data, we have our own hydrophone, and we're getting funding to analyze that data within the different hearing frequencies, try to understand better how to create a map around our ferry props that show more accurately what harassment zones might be there, instead of this kind of general, very conservative, large zone for all the different marine mammals. So we're hoping by spring to have that data analyzed and that information available. We're also looking to the future for vessel retrofits. A lot of this is driven by the need to reduce fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions, but a lot of these retrofits also probably have the side benefit of reducing the noise of our vessels. So we've already replaced some propellers, and the goal there is to reduce cavitation, which is a common noise from a propeller, to reduce fuel savings, or increased fuel savings, excuse me. And so we're hoping to analyze the data we already have on some of these vessels, go back and put our hydrophone out after the new propellers are on, get the new signal, and try to compare the noise and see if we're getting a reduction, not only fuel savings, but in-water noise reduction. So there could be a potential fix you could do to existing ferries. Other things we're looking at are potential hybridization of some of our vessels. We're looking at 3 of the Jumbo 2s, seeing if we can switch to electric hybrid instead of all diesel. And again, the focus there is greenhouse gas and fuel savings, but we think we'll see an in-water noise reduction along with that change. So this pilot is just beginning. It's going to be a number of years until we may actually see a hybrid vessel out there on the water. But we're hoping we'll see the noise reduction. And as we build new vessels in the future, we'll start thinking more about sound reduction built into brand new vessels. And that's always going to be easier than retrofitting. So as you know, we built a lot of new vessels recently, and those were built a little ahead of the curve of understanding what our in-water noise effects from vessels are. So we're playing a bit of catch up here, but we're doing what we can. And I guess we have some time for questions. So this was the ribbon seal that wandered down from up north. This is pictured at Marysville a number of years ago.
You know how we have those noise reduction headphones? Or can you do something like that with the sound of that the ferry makes?
Yeah, so the question was, there's noise reduction headphones, what about doing something similar on a ferry? And there are a lot of things that could be done. There are people, marine engineers who worked with the Navy that talk about ways they mask Navy propellers, because the Navy doesn't want to be heard, of course, unless they turn on their sonar. So this kind of masking that can be done around propellers is one option. The other option is to take a look at different mechanical inside the hull that's transferring out of the hull. So it can't, it's not always just the propeller. It can be the actual machinery transmitting energy outside of the hull that causes noise. So there's really, when you start looking at it with the engineers, there's a checklist of things you can go through and see what's appropriate. The other thing we're doing when we're talking about reducing noise is during impact pile driving, we use what's called a bubble curtain around the pile, and that attenuates the noise by anywhere from 5 to 10 decibels, which is quite a reduction for in-water noise. So that's also being done regularly.
Does any of your data in Seattle, Elliott Bay, reflect what's going on with the seawall? Did you guys work with them at all?
We coordinate with them on some of the monitoring, but their work really didn't coincide with the start of our work. But I used their sightings data in trying to predict what we would see and in doing our permitting. We also coordinated with... Yeah, they did similar things. Their piles were different sizes and different methods, so the areas that they monitored were different. But they certainly did the same kind of monitoring we did. And currently, Pier 62 is undergoing some renovation as a City of Seattle project, so they're doing similar monitoring. There and then right in the back, yes.
Is there, in the dock projects, is there any mitigation for overhead shading or?
Right, mitigation, yeah. So the question is there any mitigation as part of these projects? For Colman, yes. So for Colman, we're taking out that north trestle, which is a lot of overwater coverage going away, but we're also expanding to the south, and the passenger-only ferry dock is being expanded slightly. So we are taking about 5,400 square feet out of the end of the old abandoned Pier 48 to mitigate for that additional overwater coverage that we're creating. And so that's actually just been done. I think last week they finished it. For Mukilteo, taking at that huge pier, vastly over mitigated already for anything that we would build there. So no additional mitigation for overwater coverage is needed at Mukilteo.
No different types of materials that let light in or reflect light back down or anything?
Not at this stage. You know, the piers themselves these days are concrete cast. They're already a light color. And at least at Mukilteo, the coverage over water is pretty minimal, you know, compared to a large overwater trestle like Colman. And even the new part of the Colman we're building will be the metal and the cast concrete as opposed to the darker old wood structure. And I think it was right behind you.
Two quick questions. So, adding on to what she was talking about, is this level of monitoring, is this typical for any kind of reconstruction permit, or is State Ferries sort of take it to a higher level? And the other question is there anything that you're doing regarding salmon or forage fish presence for reconstruction projects?
Yeah, so the first question is this level of monitoring and project analysis to protect biology something common? And I think for a larger project, it certainly is. I think you'll see that ferries and washdot projects are always under more scrutiny, so we're very careful to cover all our bases. It could be that some smaller ports don't do things quite in the same way we do. They do them legally under the law, but maybe not quite as much effort to make sure all the bases are covered. The second part of the question was, what about forage fish? Do we work with forage fish? Do we protect them? The answer is yes. Whenever we have a project at a terminal where forage fish may be present, we're required to go out and do the standard monitoring. I've been trained, and other washed-up biologists have been trained about how to go and do the monitoring for forage fish egg presence or absence on the beaches. So we'll make sure that it's all clear before any activity would happen that could harm forage fish. I think it was here.
You mentioned stormwater mitigation. I was wondering, so that's very progressive. First of all, thank you for taking all the time. I'm sure we're all of that. Other organizations as well. But stormwater mitigation, what kind of measures are you contemplating and putting in?
Yeah, so the question is, what about stormwater mitigation? What kind of things are we looking at? And so for Mukilteo, we are looking at infiltrating the stormwater in some areas where it's appropriate. So you need the right ground for that infiltration to take place and for the treatment to take place. We also need to make sure that we're not infiltrating into culturally sensitive resource areas. So that limits the ground at Mukilteo where you can do that kind of activity. The other kind of work we'll be doing at Mukilteo are essentially small rain gardens that catch some of the runoff from the holding and parking area. And then there'll be some active treatment and a brand new outfall at Mukilteo that will be stormwater only, but that'll be treated stormwater. That'll be monitored out that outfall. For Colman, I believe we're using a product called Forterra, which is an active stormwater treatment vault that'll be mounted underneath the trestle in certain areas, and it'll catch the stormwater, treat it, and then release it to Puget Sound. And we'll go through and we'll change out the recharge units to make sure that that treatment keeps happening.
Great. One more?
Sure.
Isn't there a recent executive order concerning incidental take? And does that only apply to migratory birds?
So I assume we were referring to the yet to be released order from the governor. So the governor is going to be releasing an order, an executive order addressing orcas. And as I understand, there are three elements they're going to look at: pollution, prey, and vessels, both vessel presence and vessel noise. And so we are going to be working as part of that order to look at our vessels and also do what we can to address the pollution part, meaning stormwater and also the sediment cleanup we're doing, particularly at Colman. Does that answer your
There's a
question?
federal level executive order too.
Excuse me?
I think there is a federal level executive order too about that same incidental take.
Okay, I'm not aware of that, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.